My husband, influenced by his mom, demands a paternity test, so I decide to take it and the results. My husband, influenced by his mom, demands a paternity test, so I decide to take it, and the results leave everyone shocked. This is going to be kind of long, so buckle up. I apologize for any formatting issues as I am writing this on my phone. I am a 28-year-old woman, and I have been with my husband, Mark, who is 30 years old, name changed for privacy, for 6 years. We have been married for the last 2 years. Before diving into the chaos of recent events, let me give you some background. From the very beginning, my relationship with my mother-in-law has been challenging, to put it mildly. She was never overtly rude, but had a way of making everything she said feel like a backhanded slap. At first, I brushed it off. I was young, naive, and deeply in love with Mark, so I convinced myself that this was just how mother-in-laws were. I had no experience with what a healthy family dynamic looked like. I left my own family's home when I was just 16 years old, and we have not been in regular contact since then. When I met Mark's parents for the first time, it was over dinner. His mom seemed perfectly pleasant at first, but then the comments started. They were subtle at the time, wrapped in a sugary tone that made me second guess if they were even meant to be hurtful. Things like, "So do you have a job of your own, or do you just live off of Mark's money?" Or, "You have such a pretty face. Have you ever thought about losing a bit of weight? You would be stunning if you were slimmer." My personal favorite, "You're a great girl, but let's be honest, no one is ever going to be good enough for my baby boy." I know, the red flags were practically waving in my face, but I ignored them. In my defense, I was head over heels for Mark, and I did not want to make waves. She always delivered these comments with a sweet smile, like they were meant as jokes, and I told myself that I was overreacting. For the first couple of years, her behavior stayed in the realm of petty. It was mostly underhanded jabs about my weight, or the assumption that I was only dating Mark for his money. For context, we work in the same profession and make roughly the same amount of money. Sure, Mark earns a bit more than I do, but not enough to make me some sort of gold digger. At first, her comments bothered me deeply. I confided in Mark, who always had my back. He would confront his mom and tell her to stop, but the whole thing never seemed that serious to him. "She's just clingy," he explained. "I'm her only child, so she can get a little overbearing sometimes." Since we both worked long hours and lived an hour away from his parents, these encounters were infrequent, and I learned to grin and bear it. Everything changed when Mark proposed. It was like his mom saw our engagement as the ultimate betrayal. The night we announced our engagement to his parents was an absolute disaster. We had invited them to dinner, and the moment his mom laid eyes on the ring, her face turned bright red. She demanded to know how much it cost. When Mark told her, she lost it. She ranted about how I did not deserve a ring that expensive, and even had the audacity to complain that Mark had never bought her anything so extravagant, something she felt she deserved as his mother. That dinner was ruined. His mom stormed out, and she did not speak to Mark for 3 weeks. When she finally did, it was via text. She apologized, claiming that she was just scared to lose her little boy. I wanted to believe her, but the wedding planning that followed proved that her apology was hollow. She tried to hijack the guest list, interfered with vendors, and, of course, showed up to the wedding in a white dress. Mark was a rock throughout all of this. He stood by me, set boundaries with his mom, and even changed the vendor passwords when she tried meddling. Despite the chaos, we had a beautiful wedding, and our first year of marriage was everything I had hoped for. Then, at the end of last year, I got pregnant and everything started to spiral. We decided to surprise my in-laws one evening by dropping by their house unannounced with a small gift basket. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a thoughtful mix of items: champagne, some gourmet chocolate, and a little plaque that read "Grandma." It was my way of sharing the news that they were going to be grandparents. I was excited but also a bit nervous about how they'd react. When they opened the basket and read the plaque, there was a brief moment of confusion before realization dawned on their faces. My mother-in-law's expression shifted, and she looked directly at me and said, "You sure it's my baby Mark's, right?" I was stunned. My smile froze, and for a second I wasn't even sure I'd heard her correctly. She quickly followed it up with a laugh, waving it off like it was just a joke, and everyone else seemed to go along with it. I tried to do the same, but the words lingered in my mind, gnawing at me. From that moment on, everything started to change, and not for the better. At first, it was subtle. My mother-in-law began making little comments here and there about my appearance. She would smile sweetly and say things like, "You've really put on a few pounds, haven't you? Be careful, or your husband's eyes might start to wander." She seemed to take pride in mentioning how she stayed slim during her entire pregnancy with Mark, adding that it was all about discipline and effort. "You should really stop being so lazy and start putting some effort into looking good for my baby Mark," she'd say, emphasizing his name like it was her claim to him. Over time, her remarks became more pointed, bordering on outright offensive. She would bring up stories about women she knew who had supposedly passed off another man's child as their husbands. Each time she did, she would glance at me with a sly smile, as if she were talking directly about me without saying it outright. "I sure hope you wouldn't do something like that," she'd add with a laugh like it was all just harmless banter. But it wasn't harmless to me. I hated those comments. I told her repeatedly that they made me uncomfortable and asked her to stop. Her response was always the same. "Oh, you're too sensitive. You need to learn how to take a joke." It didn't stop there. She started bringing up Lauren, Mark's high school ex-girlfriend, in casual conversations. "Lauren was always so petite and elegant," she'd say, sighing nostalgically. "She and Mark just looked so perfect together. They had so much in common. They were both so fit." The comparisons were constant, and with my pregnancy hormones already making me emotional, it was too much. More than once, I found myself in tears after one of her visits. At first, Mark would defend me. He'd tell his mom to stop making comments like that, which only seemed to make her angrier. She'd act offended, saying she was just joking and that I was making a big deal out of nothing. But around my 4th or 5th month of pregnancy, Mark's behavior started to change. He became distant. He began visiting his mom more often, usually without me, even on weekends when I begged him to stay home because I wasn't feeling well. He stopped kissing me goodbye in the mornings before work and barely showed me any affection at all. When I asked him if something was wrong, he'd get irritated and tell me I was being clingy and annoying. "You're just hormonal," he'd say, brushing off my concerns. I started to feel like I was losing him, and deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that his mom was behind it. When my baby was born last month, my mother-in-law insisted on being in the delivery room. I didn't want her there. I wanted that moment to be about me, Mark, and our child. But when I told Mark how I felt, he said that if I didn't let her come, he wouldn't be there either. By that point, I was so exhausted, physically, emotionally, in every way imaginable, that I gave in. The labor was long and painful, but the moment I held my son for the first time, all of that faded away. It was the happiest moment of my life, and I thought nothing could ruin it. I was wrong. Barely minutes after they cleaned my baby and brought him back to me, Mark turned to me and said, "I want a paternity test." For a second, I thought it was a joke. It had to be, right? But the look on his face told me he was serious. I was stunned. All I could do was stare at him, trying to process what he'd just said. "Why?" I finally managed to ask. "Why would you even think that?" He didn't have a real answer. He just kept saying he wanted to be sure that he didn't want to raise another man's child. His words felt like knives, cutting into me in ways I didn't know were possible. I had never cheated on him. I had never given him any reason to doubt me. I worked from home, so I was almost always there. My pregnancy had been so difficult that I could barely get through the day, let alone have an affair. But none of that mattered to him. He insisted on the test, and I agreed, because what else could I do? I had nothing to hide. The results came back 3 weeks ago. They were negative. Mark wouldn't even look at me after that. My world shattered in an instant. So, he packed his things and went back to his mom's house, leaving me completely alone with a 2-week-old newborn. I remember just standing there in shock, holding the baby, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I called him repeatedly, over and over, desperate for an answer or at least some kind of explanation. But he wouldn't pick up, not even once. I thought maybe his phone had died or he needed some time to cool off, but then I started to panic. I sent him text messages trying to stay calm, telling him there must have been some sort of mistake. I even suggested that we get another paternity test, thinking that maybe the first one had been done incorrectly, but no response, nothing, just complete silence from his end. Fast forward a week. By that point, I was an absolute wreck. I was sleep-deprived, emotional, and overwhelmed trying to take care of my baby all by myself. I was still bleeding from labor complications, barely eating, barely functioning. I had reached out to him so many times, begging him to just talk to me or to come home so we could figure things out. Then, finally, he called. I remember grabbing my phone so fast I almost dropped it. I thought maybe he'd come to his senses or wanted to apologize. But no, his voice was cold, almost robotic, like he was reading from a script. He said, "My mom was right. I can't believe I married a woman like you." That was the moment when everything just clicked. His mom was right? What did he mean by that? What had she been saying about me? Why was he acting like this? I started putting the pieces together, and I realized there was no way this wasn't her doing. She must have been feeding him lies, probably about me cheating or being some kind of awful, immoral person. Nothing else made sense. Yesterday, after another day of radio silence from him, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I called my mother-in-law directly. I know, not my proudest moment, but I was desperate. She picked up, and I didn't even bother with small talk. I told her I needed to speak to Mark and that he couldn't just abandon me and our baby, especially after the traumatic complications I went through during pregnancy and labor. You know what she did? She laughed. She straight up laughed like I had just told her the funniest joke she'd ever heard. Then she said, "He's not here, and honestly, you deserve what you got." I don't think I've ever felt that level of rage in my life. I could feel my hands shaking as I held the phone, but I kept it together enough to tell her I didn't know what she thought of me, but I had never cheated on Mark, and the paternity test had to have been wrong. That's when she dropped the bombshell. She laughed again, this smug, cruel little laugh, and said, "Oh, I know, I made sure of it. I was the one who submitted the wrong sample." I swear I couldn't breathe for a second. She just kept talking like she wasn't casually admitting to sabotaging my marriage and ruining my life. She told me she didn't think I deserved her precious son, and she wasn't about to let me baby trap him. Then she said, and I'll never forget this, "Mark would never believe you over me. I'm his mother. Just let it go." I was so stunned I couldn't even respond. She took my silence as permission to keep going, launching into some long, self-righteous rant about how she always wanted Mark to end up with a woman who was good enough for him, whatever that means. She even brought up his ex-girlfriend Lauren and how she was so much prettier and more successful and how she still wished Mark had married her instead of me. Apparently, this whole paternity test scam was her way of getting rid of me so she could fix Mark's life and find him someone better. I hung up on her mid-sentence. I couldn't take it anymore. I've been in this weird, numb headspace ever since. It's like my brain can't even process what's happening. I mean, who does that? Who manipulates their own child's life to this extent? She's a grown woman, and she acted like she was plotting the next big soap opera twist. So now I'm here. I texted Mark right after the call, telling him everything she said and begging him to ask her about it himself. I haven't heard back yet, but I'm not holding my breath. I keep wondering if I should get another paternity test just to prove to him that she lied. But would it even matter? Would he even believe me at this point, or would he just assume I was the liar? And then there's the bigger question. If he does decide to come back, should I even take him back? How am I supposed to trust someone who abandoned me and our newborn so easily just because his mom said so? I don't even know what to do anymore. Should I lawyer up? Should I fight for him to stay out of my life for good? If anyone has been through anything like this, I could really use some advice. Update 1. First of all, thank you so much to everyone who replied and gave advice. I really did not expect this post to get the kind of attention it did. Last night, I went to bed after writing it and woke up to over 900 comments. I've read through all of them, but honestly, there's no way I can reply to every single one, so I'll try to answer the main questions here. As I mentioned in my original post, I am not close with my family at all. To clarify, I have not spoken to my parents in years. They did not come to my wedding, and as far as I know, they are completely unaware of my baby. Frankly, I doubt they would care even if they knew. My family is originally from Minnesota, but I moved to the East Coast when I left my parents' house. I worked a variety of jobs to put myself through both school and college. That's where I met Mark, and since then, I have been working remotely. Right now, I do not have many friends nearby, and my family is simply not an option for support. I do have a coworker who lives in the area. For privacy, I'll call her Katie. We are not super close, but we text occasionally. When everything started falling apart, I decided to reach out to Katie and tell her a little bit about what was going on. To my surprise, she was incredibly kind and offered to come over just to give me some company and support. When she arrived at my house, I was a complete mess. I had not showered in a week, the house was in chaos, and my 2-week-old baby was crying nonstop in my arms. I just stood there holding my son, feeling completely overwhelmed, and the moment I saw her, I started sobbing. It was definitely awkward because, like I said, we are not that close, but Katie was amazing. She hugged me, asked me what was wrong, and when I couldn't even explain it all out loud, I just handed her my phone and let her read my original post. Katie has been nothing short of a lifesaver. She has been watching my son while I finally cleaned up, had some actual food, and took my first proper shower in 2 weeks. I cannot explain how good it felt to just be clean and eat something that was not a granola bar or a piece of toast. She has also been an incredible emotional support, standing by me and validating how I feel. She is furious on my behalf, and honestly, it feels so good to have someone in my corner for once. Some of you asked about my father-in-law, so here's a little more context. I never talked much about him because he is pretty quiet. He has always been polite to me, and as far as I can tell, he generally ignores my mother-in-law. I really do not know what he thinks of me, but he has never been unkind. My mother-in-law, on the other hand, has made her dislike for me painfully obvious from the start. I do not think it has anything to do with race or religion, as a few of you suggested. We are all white and not religious, so that is not a factor. If I had to guess, I think it might be about my appearance. I am taller and have a slightly bigger build than most women. I am not obese or unhealthy by any means. I work out and go to the gym regularly, but I am definitely not petite. Mark, on the other hand, is extremely fit and very into working out, and I think my mother-in-law might prefer someone smaller, like Mark's exes. It is just a guess, but it would not surprise me. Now, for the legal stuff, I have decided that I am absolutely moving forward with the divorce. I cannot look at Mark the same way ever again after what he has done. I know this is the right decision for both me and my son. I have already taken screenshots of every conversation I have had with Mark and my mother-in-law just in case. I plan to contact a lawyer today to start the process officially. I am also going to get another paternity test, even though I already know the truth. Once I have the results, I will hand them to Mark alongside the divorce papers. As for Mark, he still has not responded to any of my texts. At this point, I do not care. His complete lack of effort to talk to me, or even consider how his actions would affect me and our son, has made it crystal clear that I do not want him in my life. I am angry beyond words, but more than that, I am just done. I cannot allow my son to grow up with a man like him as a role model. I know this update is all over the place, and I am sorry for that. My thoughts are still jumbled, but I wanted to share where things stand right now. Thank you again to everyone who has offered advice and support. It means more than I can say. Update 2. Hey everyone, it has been an intense couple of months since my last post, and I wanted to thank everyone who commented, sent private messages, or just reached out with words of encouragement. It really meant a lot to me. I know a lot of you have been asking for an update, so here it is. Buckle up, because it's a long one. So, it's been about 2 months since I shared my first update. To catch you up quickly, 2 days after I posted that, Mark came back home. I had been trying to hold myself together, leaning on my friend Katie for support, and had already consulted a lawyer to start divorce proceedings. When Mark turned up early one morning, I was not prepared for what I saw. He looked absolutely wrecked, unkempt, unshaven, and his eyes were bloodshot as if he had been crying for days. Honestly, I was stunned. We just stood there staring at each other before he broke down sobbing and apologizing. I won't lie, it was incredibly hard to see him like that. For 6 years, this man was the center of my world, and even though I had been so angry, hearing him say he was sorry hit me harder than I expected. I let him come inside, but I kept my distance, sitting on the couch with our baby in my arms while he cried. At one point, he asked if he could hold our son, and I just couldn't. The anger from everything he had done boiled up again, and I said no. To his credit, he didn't argue, he just nodded and stayed quiet. After a while, he pulled himself together and asked if we could talk. I agreed because I needed to hear what he had to say. But I made sure to record the conversation on my phone. Thank you to the person who suggested that in the comments. Mark told me that after I sent him the text explaining what his mother had said about our son's paternity, he didn't want to believe it. But her words lingered in his head until he couldn't ignore them anymore. When he finally confronted her, she denied everything and doubled down, claiming I was trying to trap him with a baby for his money and isolate him from his family. Apparently, this was her narrative for months. However, things took a turn when Mark's father stepped in. He was done with her manipulations and told Mark the truth. She had convinced her nephew, who worked at the lab where the paternity test was done, to falsify the results. That was the moment Mark realized how deeply he had been manipulated, not just by his mother, but by his own willingness to believe her lies. He admitted that he had been a terrible husband and father and begged me to give him a chance to make things right. Hearing him admit his mistakes was validating, but it didn't erase the hurt. It got worse when he started confessing to other things. His mother had been working overtime to sabotage our marriage. She thought I wasn't good enough for him, claiming I was too large and womanly, and pushing him to reconnect with his ex, Lauren, whom she described as prettier and more suitable. She even had the audacity to accuse me of cheating on Mark and claimed that the baby wasn't his. At some point during my 4th month of pregnancy, when I couldn't make it to a family dinner, his mother invited Lauren over and encouraged Mark to spend time with her. Lauren, of course, played her part perfectly, flirting with him and making him feel wanted. Mark admitted he fell for it and started seeing her behind my back. He swore they never slept together, but they dated, kissed, and did stuff, as if that made it any less of a betrayal. He said guilt finally got the better of him, and he ended things with Lauren a week before I went into labor. After spilling everything, he begged me for another chance. He said he would cut his mother out of our lives and do whatever it took to make things right. For a moment, I almost considered it, but then I looked at my son and remembered everything Mark had put me through, the lies, the gaslighting, the abandonment. It hit me that I couldn't trust him anymore, and without trust, there was no foundation to rebuild. I told him it was over. He cried but didn't argue. He booked a hotel nearby and left that same day. I insisted on taking another paternity test to confirm the truth once and for all. He protested at first, but eventually agreed. 2 weeks later, the results came back. Mark is the father. I won't lie. When I saw those results, I felt a little vindicated. All his doubts, all his mother's lies, and it was all for nothing. Last week, the divorce papers were finalized and I had them served. Mark tried one last time to suggest couples counseling, but I told him I was done. I am asking for a 50-50 split of our assets and primary custody of our son with supervised visitation for Mark. My lawyer is confident these terms will be granted, especially with the evidence I have documenting Mark's behavior. As for his mother, she is completely cut off. She will never be allowed near my son. Mark's father reached out to apologize for not stepping in sooner. I forgave him because, honestly, he seems like a decent guy who just got stuck with a manipulative partner. Apparently, he's considering leaving her too, but I have no idea what's going on there because she's been blocked since the day Mark showed up at my door. As for me, I'm moving out of our apartment and starting fresh. It's overwhelming and sad to see my marriage end like this, but I am hopeful for the future. My focus now is on myself and my son, and I'm determined to build a better life for us. Thank you to everyone who supported me through this. I don't think I would have made it this far without your advice and encouragement. I probably won't be updating again for a while. I need to focus on the next chapter of my life. Update 3. I completely forgot about this account. It has been over a year since my last post. Honestly, I deleted Reddit off my phone at some point and just kind of forgot it existed. A lot has happened since then, and I thought I'd drop a quick update for those who were following my story. First off, my divorce is finally in the home stretch. The paperwork is set to be finalized next month, and it feels like I can finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. The process took way longer than I anticipated because Mark decided to fight me on custody arrangements. Initially, we had agreed that I would have the majority of the custody and his visits would be supervised, but he suddenly decided he didn't want to go along with that anymore. Thankfully, my lawyer is absolutely incredible. Seriously, I owe her my sanity. With the recordings I had of Mark admitting to his behavior during my pregnancy and the way he acted afterward, it looks like things are going to go in my favor. It's been a stressful and emotional ride, but I'm feeling optimistic about the outcome. My son is 14 months old now, and he is the absolute light of my life. He's the sweetest little boy, and watching him grow and learn every day is such a gift. We've moved across the state to start fresh, and it has been one of the best decisions I've ever made. Our new apartment is small but cozy, and it feels like home in a way my old life never did. I'm incredibly fortunate to have a job that allows me to spend plenty of quality time with my son. That's something I never want to take for granted. On top of that, I've started to rebuild my social life a little bit. I joined a book club here, shout out to Paige for convincing me to give it a try, and I've actually made some wonderful new friends. It feels so good to have a support system and people who genuinely care about me. Things are far from perfect. The divorce has been draining, the move was overwhelming, and single parenting is no joke. But even with all that, I feel lighter, freer. Life without Mark, and frankly, his mother's constant meddling, feels like a breath of fresh air. That woman made it her mission to make my life miserable, and Mark was all too happy to let her. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags when he continuously put her needs above those of his pregnant wife. But you live and learn, right? I can confidently say I will never make that mistake again. As for relationships, I don't know. Right now, my priority is my son and making sure he has the best possible life. I'm not ruling anything out, but I'm also not looking. I've realized I'm in a better place than I was a year ago, and that's enough for me. I don't think I'll be updating here again, but I want to thank everyone who reached out with kind words or support after my last post. It meant more to me than I can express. For now, I'm focusing on moving forward, one day at a time.